Thanks for letting me talk here and have a bit of a conversation about carbon and cropping. Bit of background, I've been a grain grower for a long time. I've been on the GrainGrowers board as a director for 3 years, and seeing how this sort of the carbon discussions developed over the last probably 4 or 5 years has been really interesting. So I took a bit of an interest when I first jumped on the GrainGrowers board to sort of to try and learn a bit more about it, and that's where my story sort of started. One of the big issues we found at GrainGrowers was basically there was a lot of calculators out there, and the question we wanted to ask was, are they accurate? Did they actually give a consistent number if you put the same numbers in? And if they didn't do that, what do we need to do as an industry body to make sure that if growers are going down the line of measuring their carbon and promoting their carbon or being involved in that space, we don't want to be in an industry where we're greenwashing. So it's really important to what we do as an industry and right down to a grower level is what we're saying we're doing is accurate. And that was the evolution of the Carbon Calculators report. And I'll reference, there's a lot of publications grain growers have done, and I think there's a few pamphlets and booklets up the back. Grab them, they're really easy, simple books to read. But a few basics on carbon, it's a cycle. And your farm, like you run a rotation, the carbon works through your farm, and it's not a static number. It changes daily. Whatever process you want to be doing on the farm has an impact on either carbon you emit or carbon that you take into your system. But at the end of the day, the numbers that pop out of these calculators is, at the moment, one number. And you've got to take that in context with environment, seasonal conditions, and what your farming practices do. So this is just a really quick outline of what your basically cropping farming system looks like. You start at seeding, or even in fallow, you're emitting, you're putting out chemicals, you're burning diesel. You go to seeding, you're using the inputs as well. The growing actually takes it in through the plants. You need carbon in your system. Every plant, everything needs carbon to exist. So you suck it in. How much of that you keep within your soil is up for a lot of debate. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a soil scientist. I will not go into any of the technical stuff. Me looking at that for the last 4 or 5 years confuses me. But this is really a basic overview. So basically you go through your farming system, you're emitting it if the arrows are pointing up, and you're taking it in if the arrows are pointing down. Probably the really big one that confused me, and I had a lot of issue working it through my head on how this works, was the fallow and the stubble breakdown. In being a farmer, I'm thinking the more stubble I can have, the better it is, the more water I'm going to store through my system. And then I get told that stubble breaking down is, a big emitter in my system. And I'm going, well, I want to do that. I need to do that for my farming system. I'm not going to stop doing that. But it's one of my major emitting factors through my cycle. So what can I do, or do I have to do anything? And if you're still burning off, obviously that's not a great positive. But when you think about it, you don't have the stubble there to have the emissions. So there's a lot of questions that come up about your farming system and carbon. Don't get too involved in the complexities of it. Just try and understand, get a general principle or understanding of this is the cycle, starts there, it'll go like this during the season and we'll end up somewhere. Okay, so one of the reasons I explained why I got into it was the grain growers thing. The other one was I thought I could make money out of this. I thought it'd be a really good dual income at the beginning to supplement my cropping system. I sat in it was at Sydney University, I sat in listening to a professor discuss about how easy it would be in theory to fix the carbon cycle in the world. Basically, he made a really quick comment, which I grabbed onto, that said, if every farmer in the world did one green manure crop and farmed it back in, technically that would absorb enough carbon for us to solve a lot of our issues in the world. And I probably took that on a bit more than what I thought, and I thought, wow, we can do this really well. It sounds really simple, so I was looking at all different rotations and how that could do it. But that was one of my interests, saying, can I make money out of this thing? Should I sell those accus? And I'll go into that a bit later. The second one, there's obviously a marketing benefit. If you're a first adopter in some products, you normally get the premium. As the market develops and matures, that premium falls out of the market, and you end up like I think you were discussing before, that if you're not doing it in the end, you're probably getting a discount for it. So that's an interest. As I followed in my journey a little bit, I started realising, well, we don't really have to sell these things, because I don't really want to take the risk on having that exposure, but I can bank them. And how can I bank them? And is that going to be like water 10 years down the track or 15 years down the track? Is the bank going to come back to me, or am I going to be able to go to the bank in 10 years' time with a triple balance sheet? I've got land, I've got water, and I've got natural capital. And get them to put a value on it, and then get that rewards coming through that system. So increasing my natural wealth. So there's a possibility. Social licence has a big thing to play. With growers, we're always under pressure with the community. Should we bow to that social licence, or should we oppose it? I mean, everyone's got a different view, but at the end of the day, I think life's a lot easier when community all get on and we can understand we're all going to a common goal. So if we can bring consumers on our journey, it's got benefits all the way around. Is it going to bring extra money? No. Potentially, is it going to make our farming system easier down the track when we face issues like glyphosate, like the current one with paraquat? We need that social licence to be able to oppose something when we don't think it's right. But if we don't have any benefits on the other, if we haven't built up any of this social licence with our customers, it's a really hard argument to make, to go out and tell them if they don't understand our journey. So that's got a bit of play with it. And regulation and reporting. Like, what's this landscape going to look like in 5 or 10 years? Do we have to be doing this reporting? At the moment, we don't. But it could happen. It's not something to be scared about. I think it'll be, my view in the future in 10 years' time, this is my view, not anyone else's view, not GrainGrowers' view, is that it'll be like doing your normal accounts. You've got to lodge them in the tax department, you're probably going to have to lodge them, and they'll get done. So, yes. So that's why I started, and that's sort of my thinking process behind why I really want to be involved in this space. Okay, my experience. So basically from GrainGrowers, we had that issue with the carbon calculators. We saw that there was a problem. I thought, great, I'll be the test dummy. I'll chuck my numbers through all these different calculators and see how they all came out. There was myself and a farmer from Western Australia did it. We've now done it twice. I think we've assessed 8 models, 8 different calculators, and surprisingly, you get 8 different results out of 8 different calculators. But just to take a step back, so it's quite hard to, I'm not sure the level of understanding within in the room. So there's 3 types of emissions. Scope 1 is what you're doing on your farm, is what you're emitting out, okay? Scope 2 is basically buying in electricity or power. It's pretty simple. Not a big player on the farm side unless you're intensive agriculture. And Scope 3, they're indirect emissions from goods that you purchase. And everyone goes, why do we need to measure Scope 3s? And there's a really, really easy answer to it. Because if the whole aim in this system is to reduce emissions in the whole sector, if we don't know what the products we're buying, we don't know what their emissions are, we can't then make a choice if we buy A or B, but B might have a lot less emissions. So if you put that thought process in your mind, and don't worry that you're thinking that you're taking in someone else's emissions and all the negative aspects of it, and think of it as a positive. It's really a decision-making tool for you to be able to choose the cheapest, well, the best product for your business. Not necessarily the cheapest, it might be the cheapest, it might be the more expensive, but you can make a choice on emissions down the track. And if you think about that, you won't get caught up in being worried about or concerned that you're just measuring someone else's carbon emissions. Okay, so these are some of the examples. The figure on your left just shows you the variability of comparing two different models, the GAF one and the CFT model. They're just two calculators that you can get off the internet and put your numbers through. So if you look at it, the different colours of the scopes. So under GGAF, you know, I've got, 1,000 there versus probably 600. And you get that variability all the way through because what these calculators are based on are on certain assumptions. So whatever data, we fed the exact same data into each of these calculators. And these are the results we got out. So this is an industry issue. We need consistency. We can't be greenwashing. We can't be telling things that aren't true. And we're talking about more, in some of these cases, it was up to like 40% difference in the numbers that were coming out of these different calculators. So the learnings from that is that, yes, do a calculator. Understand what it is, where your numbers sit. They are not gospel. At the moment, they are not 100% true or correct. But it gives you an idea, a starting point for what your farm may or may not look like. That's a really important thing. I'll talk a bit at the end about what, as an industry group, GrainGrowers is doing to try and get that consistency. But it's really important that you understand that. I think Guy broached on it this morning that the first year they were carbon neutral because they didn't put any fertiliser on. I can give a great example. There was a shipment of barley that went out of Western Australia sold as carbon neutral for exactly the same reason. A group of farmers coming out of a drought didn't need to put nitrogen on, so therefore they sold that barley as carbon neutral. Now that's not, as an industry, what we want. That's some people trying to grab a bit of easy cash, but it doesn't work long run because eventually, as you'll see, I don't know if you follow the financial markets, there was a big case about Mercer. The ACCC got them for doing a bit of greenwashing through their investment portfolios. It'll happen. It's being looked at. So we need some consistency going through. To give you a bit of a breakup about Scope 1 on general farm, Australian farming industries, about 61% is Scope 1 emissions, 0.1 is Scope 2, and about 30 to 40% is Scope 3 emissions when you get your numbers back. Okay, so this is actually our farm. So we're at 65% Scope 1s, 23 Scope 3, and about 10, the two Scope 3 numbers are just the variance between the two models. So that shows you how much difference you can get between the different models. And I'm pretty sure that came down to the way that each calculator assessed anhydrous ammonia application. They were quite different on the amount of emissions that they thought putting anhydrous ammonia in for a fertiliser did that year. And in our farm, we haven't used anhydrous ammonia for 10 years. And the 1 year they did that test, we actually used it because that's when fertiliser went. Urea was at $1,700 and anhydrous was a little bit cheaper. So you can see how little things have big impacts, but you don't get caught up in the detail. And Scope 2, once again, they're pretty, not really of any consequence. Okay, so Guy went through a bit of this morning on his farm, and it's pretty similar. Fertiliser is one of your big uses in scope 1s, or your big emitters. If you use lime, it's also a big emitter. Residue, that's your crop breakdown. That's what you're emitting. That's what they're calculating. That residue breaks down. Now, you can't do anything about that. Like, do you not want the residue? Do you go back to farming it all in? And then, so you've got to make sure that you're not making decisions just on emissions, but you're making good, sensible rotation farming decisions. We're doing everything in our farming program to increase our residue. We're using stripper fronts for harvest, so we maintain full stubble cover the whole time. And it's got all the other benefits that greatly outweigh having an emission number for crop residue. It's one of those ones I've had quite a few heated discussions with people trying to explain the science of how my stubble residue breakdowns is having a negative impact on the environment, because I automatically go to, well, the forest does the same thing. So how can a forest be a net consumer of carbon, and I'm doing a similar thing? And everyone's always got answers, and there is a scientific answer for it. You just got to take it for what you believe. But the point to bring out of it is that don't take bad farming decisions for carbon. You still got to make money, and in the long run, it's the whole cycle that comes through. Then you'll see in your scope 3s, obviously fertiliser has got high scope 3 costs as well, because we don't make fertiliser in Australia. It's all got to get imported in. It's a high energy using product to make. So all those need to be taken into account. So when you're reading, and there's a lot been going on in the space about producing our own fertiliser here and low emission fertiliser and things like that. So there's work being done which will probably flow through over the next, maybe 10 years. We'll see something that's really probably active and prominent on your farms that will reduce those numbers. Any real questions on that? It's all pretty simple. I mean, that's just what it tells you. You just got to find out from these calculators what it is, how you're emitting it, what the practices are that emit the most, what the practices are that emit the less, and use that information to change your farming system, but make sure you're doing it in a way that's financially viable and not costing you a lot of money down the track. Like, you've got to always have that mindset of financial stability, sustainability. This is a pretty tiny little one, so you probably can't really read it very well, but this is our farm's actual ones. So we're a net emitter. You see that one model had us pegged about there, and one model had us pegged there, which, I mean, that's a big variance for two calculators that say that they're giving you an accurate number. So just keep that in the back of your mind, okay? And then it'll be one or two. See, the fertiliser one here was what threw it really out. And it's just an assumption on one calculator that was different on the other calculator. Everything else is not too bad. There's a bit of difference in leaching and runoff and decompensation. Surprisingly, they both use the same emissions for crop residue breakdown. So, has anyone sat in a room? Have I got soil scientists in the room? Put your hand up. One. Only one. If you ever, can I tell a soil scientist joke?
Only if I can do one too.
They can. You put two in a room, and you'll have an endless conversation because no two can agree on any part of anything that I've seen in my journey in the last 5 years. Okay, so why do we do this? Why do we want to measure out? Why did I want to start doing it? So it's really to make better decisions and make my farm a better farm, and hopefully improve my sustainability and my income, my wealth generation. Okay, so really when it comes back to what my advice to growers would be after going through this process, one, you've got to understand your carbon cycle. It's not a static thing. It moves, it changes. everything, it's a really dynamic thing. So one year your number might be something, the next year it's going to be something else. So to get a really good understanding of it, you've got to understand how each different operation or rotation impacts what your carbon system looks like. And once you get that base understanding, things get a lot easier to understand going down the track. So understand, do a bit of research. There's great publications out there on it. Measure it. Put your numbers through a calculator, but don't get caught up on the actual number, what it is. Don't get caught up comparing that calculator to that calculator. To begin with, until we get some consistency with these calculators, just understand that that's sort of where my number's probably sitting. I'm not neutral. I may be on the borderline. I'm probably a bit of a emitter. You know, I might have a practice that throws me out that way. Know what that practice is, so then you can make decisions going back on your farming system to improve it. You might find out that you're storing carbon. Good luck to try and prove it over a long period of time. It's hard. I mean, from what I've gathered, we're doing all the easy stuff now. Measuring the emissions isn't a hard step. Measuring what we're taking in through the soil and storing it and how long we're storing it for, that's the really hard stuff. And that's why we're not really having a big play. You don't see those numbers in these calculators coming up much. They're normally, you're normally getting a cross and not a tick for your farming system. But I think over time, our knowledge will build up. We might get soil scientists to agree on a few principles, and then we can see where we go with that one. And if you're really interested in it, looking at baselining your farm, you've got to know where you're at. If you don't know where you're at, you can't do anything, as Mac has said before. Like, you've really got to know your starting point. And you can do that just by yourself with your own soil tests. If you want to go down the track and start, involving yourself in the carbon market, you've got to do it properly. There's protocols, the soil tests are all done under a certain set of protocols that give you that consistency going forward, and you need that. You can't be using your old... I've got 20 years of soil test carbon results on my farm, so I know what I'm doing, but I can't use those as a baseline if I want to jump into the market. So, as I said, GrainGrowers has got some really good reports out. We've invested a lot of money in this space in education. We are an independent industry body that looks for issues that growers are facing, and we basically put money towards it to try and do some education pieces. So they're available online, on the website. I think there's some hard copies up the back. Grab them, read them. If you've got questions, Beck's here. She's our local representative of this area. She can explain it all for you. There's a carbon calculator report. So this basically goes into a lot more depth about what I've discussed today, comparing the different carbon calculators, looking at the different numbers. But at the end of the day, it's telling you we're not getting consistent numbers out of them. So take that and understand that when you get your number there. Okay, a little bit of work what GrainGrowers are doing. So coming out of the calculators work, we've realised the need that we need that common, the number that comes out of those calculators, if they're going to be used, they've got to have a margin of error probably under 15%, something like that. And at the moment, some of them are running 40% different numbers coming out. So we're really pushing government and other bodies hard to say, let's get some common assumptions behind all these calculators, so growers will have they'll have confidence when they put their numbers in, what they're getting out is actually pretty close. We're also on the side pushing for RIC to actually be able to use RIC money to invest in these sort of projects on farm. So that's a little side. Any questions? My thought process would be you tackle your easy ones first, and the ones you can have an impact on, you do. So that's the beauty of knowing where your numbers sit. Try and pick all the low-hanging fruit first. I think technology is going to play a big part in where our emissions go in the future. New tech coming in will solve some of these problems for us that we can't see at the moment. like low emission urea. There's billions of dollars being invested worldwide in that tech at the moment. It'll come out, because one thing the world's good at is that when it's got a real major problem, it actually gets things fixed. So I think technology will play a big part in reducing some of those ones that we can't have a big impact on. But you can make a decision on your Scope 3 fertiliser. You can choose to buy from a lower energy producing source. That's there. They're the easy things to fix. Like to reduce inputs is number one if we're wasting it, or putting it on different soil types and using different products to suit your farming practices instead of just doing the same thing all the time every year. We do variable rate fertilisers. We do all that on our property, and they're still our numbers. So we've probably taken a lot of the easy hanging fruit out of our system. But that's not to say, we're doing a lot of, one of the other groups I'm involved with at the moment, we're doing a lot of research in rotation financial analysis to look at, if we put a green manure crop in or we pull that crop out, financially, what's it going to cost us versus what emissions it costs us. So those little calculations make those farming decisions a lot easier, hopefully down the track. And using technology, there's a lot of tech out there that everyone uses, but we probably don't really make any money out of it. It's fun to play with all that new stuff that comes out, but how do you actually convert, let's say we've had moisture probes for 10 years in different types of ranges of whatever you want to look at, but I still can't look at a moisture probe in my dryland cotton crop when I'm hitting peak flower and work out what's my management decision going on for the next 30 days, looking at the forecast rainfall events. Like that, I can't just pick that number out of my head now and make a really good decision. It's a lot of guesswork. So with tech is going to play a big role in reducing our inputs or maximising our inputs, because emissions is a factor. It depends how you compare it too, because do you do it on per production point, so you increase your yield, you decrease your emissions, or you're looking at total emissions out of your farm, which is what you're emitting per farm factor. So there's a lot of different ways to look at different stuff within this field.